Welcome to Immigration Review, your weekly source for immigration case law updates and insights. I'm your host, Kevin A. Gregg, back again to review the week's precedential immigration cases, rummaging through the decisions so you don't have to. This podcast is sponsored by Kurzban, Tetzeli, and Pratt, also known as KKTP, a law firm where I'm also a partner. Whether you are facing an immigration obstacle, a serious injury, or a legal issue in your business, KKTP will aggressively protect your best interests. This podcast is also sponsored by DocketWise, an all-in-one immigration forms and case management solution trusted by thousands of immigration lawyers across the U.S. I really like DocketWise. It makes immigration applications easy by allowing the clients to provide information through simple online questionnaires that are shareable by text or email and available in multiple languages. Not only that, DocketWise provides a comprehensive group of case management features, including invoicing and calendaring, secure messaging, task management, and a lot more. You can learn all about DocketWise and receive a 10% discount on your subscription by heading to docketwise.com/immigration-review, so they know we sent you. And as always, this show does not constitute legal advice and has no bias other than to keep you up to date and to enable you, my dear colleagues, to excel in court. So, without further ado, let's start the review. I have a Halloween treat for you all. On October 20th, 2023, I tricked my first active duty immigration judge into coming on the podcast. I'm just kidding. Judge Meese Tsankov graciously agreed to give me 30 minutes of her scarce time to speak in her capacity as president of the National Association of Immigration Judges. And who was I to say no? Judge Tsankov is the current president of the NAIJ. She was appointed to the bench as an immigration judge in 2006, and as you'll hear in a minute, has had quite the career. Judge Tsankov is actively involved with the legal and non-legal community, mentoring and speaking regularly before bar associations, conferences, symposiums, organizations, and schools. She serves as secretary of the Federal Bar Association Judiciary Division. At the American Bar Association, Judge Tsankov is vice chair of the Judicial Division National Conference of Administrative Law Judges, serves as liaison to the ABA Commission on Immigration, and has an ABA presidential appointment to the United Nations Department of Global Communications in her capacity as president of the NAIJ. Did I mention her time is scarce? Judge Tsankov is a member of the board of the National Association of Women Judges. She also serves as an adjunct law professor at Fordham Law School and publishes regularly in peer-reviewed and general interest journals. Not only that, but she very recently testified alongside AILA immediate past President Jeremy McKinney and others before the U.S. Senate. And immediate past President Jeremy McKinney was immediate past guest on the Immigration Review podcast. Coincidence? 100%, but I don't hate the optics. Please enjoy this conversation with Judge Tsankov. Good morning, Judge Tsankov. Thank you so much for being with me today. It's an honor, Your Honor.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's a pleasure to join you today as well. I'm a fan of your podcast and look forward to participating.
That's on the record for all time, and I'm very honored that you said that. Thank you very much. Before we get started, what capacity are you speaking to me in today?
I'm speaking as president of the National Association of Immigration Judges. I've been in that role now for about 2.5 years.
It's important for everybody to know and to remember. And you don't just speak to me. I guess your position with the National Association of Immigration Judges permits you to represent that entity in a variety of capacities. I believe you spoke before the Senate 2 days ago, and we're going to get to that, right?
Yes. So any of the comments that I'm making in that capacity are no reflection on the positions of the Department of Justice, the Executive Office for Immigration Review, or the Attorney General.
But if I am doing my calendaring correctly, you testified before the Senate in Washington And then your immediate next interview was with the Immigration Review podcast. Is that correct?
That's correct. The scoop. You got the scoop.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you, Judge. What is the National Association of Immigration Judges? I don't think a lot of people know about it.
Well, it's been in existence for almost 50 years, and we are the association that represents all of the immigration judges seated all over the country in the 70 courts around the country and about 700 judges. Whether or not they're members, we still represent them. We speak on behalf of their concerns, their needs regarding working conditions, and proposing ways to professionalize the immigration judge corps nationally.
It sounds like a union.
That's a great question. We have been the recognized bargaining unit vis-a-vis our relationship with the Department of Justice for many years. But fairly recently, we were decertified, and I'm happy to share more information about that today.
I would like to get into that because there's lawsuits going on with the NAIJ, whether you're a union, whether it's proper to have an immigration judges union. And I'm also always interested, whether it's a union or something similar, about how, like you said, you represent individuals, judges in this case, even if they're not members of the NAIJ. But before getting deep into all of that, if you could tell me some of your reasons for joining the bench and a bit of your career path, I think listeners would really appreciate it. I know I would.
Well, I'd like to just actually go back to when I was only 17 years old. Probably it was such a surprise. I had an opportunity to join as an intern with the State Department visa office.
Oh. And
I was just I think a GS2. I don't think there were any GS1s. I was probably the lowest level in all of government. But even if you're a kid and you're working for the State Department, back in those days, they give you some responsibility. And my job at the time was doing background checks for all the non-immigrant visas for the entire world. So,
wow.
Yeah, if I messed up one of those calls to the FBI to get those background clearances done, someone couldn't travel, which is frightening considering I was 17 and worried about where I was going to get my next pack of bubble gum. And that's not a joke.
I think putting aside how this is about to lead to your path to being an immigration judge, I think a lot of the immigration attorney listeners are a bit horrified that at least a little while ago, State was farming out its background check responsibilities to a 17-year-old. State and what they do is a bit of a black hole to us. So, Judge, you've actually given us an insight into what's going on in those consulates and in D.C. just a little bit.
I'm sure it's gotten much tighter scrutiny since that time, especially with all the mistakes I've probably made.
Nah, I doubt it.
Then after that, I ended up going to college and then to law school. Also got a master's in foreign affairs. And the first place I landed was with a big law firm working on international law. But the next place that I went was working as an attorney for the Peace Corps, Office of Inspector General. That was an incredible opportunity to travel all around the world, handling matters involving fraud, waste, and abuse perpetrated against the U.S. government and against Peace Corps volunteers. That was a fascinating place to work as well. And then I became an asylum officer when they created the Asylum Corps. I had a chance to do 2 years as an asylum officer. I did that for only 1 year because then I became a trial attorney with the then INS. Did that for a few years, became a special assistant U.S. attorney, and then went into private practice, much like you, Kevin. Did that for about 7 years and then joined the bench.
You've really touched on pretty much everything you can have as a background before becoming an immigration judge, at least in the immigration world, especially that Peace Corps stint. That's something that I certainly thought of when I was an undergrad. That's a wonderful thing. If we had more time, I'd really like to dive deeper into that. I mean, I think we have a little time. What countries did you get to go to, and what kind of fraud, waste, and abuse did you encounter?
At the time, there was the emerging democracies. It was in the early 90s. So we called those Eastern European countries emerging democracies. So they were sending a lot of people who were lawyers and people with business degrees to go and help these emerging democracies flourish. And so whenever there were issues related to financial concerns, audits, this sort of thing, I would go and handle those. Then I don't know how well this is known, but we have Peace Corps volunteers all over the world, and there are concerns about crime against those Peace Corps volunteers, and things happen usually once a week. So we would debrief any of the Peace Corps volunteers that have been victims of certain types of serious crimes in the U.S.
You went from, you did a lot of things, but most notably to me, you went from being a trial attorney to private practice, and then private practice to the bench. And I was wondering if you could talk to me about how those transitions were, what the differences were, what your thoughts were every time you would change between those positions.
One of the things that I always try to talk about with young people as I mentor them as they're going through their careers is I try to say the path that I took was to pick a subject area, and my subject area was immigration and foreign affairs, this type of thing. And I looked for different ways to engage in that subject matter based on what I needed in order to have a work-life balance and family balance that fit for me at the time. So when I did private practice, I was doing employment-based visas and this type of area of immigration law, which was more conducive to having small children for me in my life and my career. When I was earlier on in my career, I took assignments that were more travel-oriented or more litigation-oriented. And I can say as a woman, I consider the fact that I was able to transition from being in private practice into the immigration courts was lucky. I think it's hard to be able to, at the time, it was really challenging to get one of these positions. I think it still is, but I felt extremely fortunate to have been selected to become an immigration judge because it was my dream to become one. I had wanted to be one for a few decades.
What was it like to go from being an advocate for non-citizens, albeit in the employment visa context, it sounds, to being a neutral arbitrator? What kind of mental shift did you need to do, if any?
You actually think that you're going to know what you need to do because you've been sitting in all those different seats in the courtroom in a sense. But once you get behind that bench, it's very nerve-wracking initially. And it took me a little while to find my own confidence in myself, to realize, look, I am the type of person that likes to create an environment where even if the case isn't going to go in the direction that you thought, there's not going to be a surprise to anybody. No gotcha moments. It's going to be a professional experience every day in my courtroom, and one that, you're going to leave not feeling like you've had a terrible day. So I felt the confidence to create that environment. And I really try to do that in every court day that I have. And that's what makes the job wonderful. But it does take time to gain the confidence to know that you can be yourself once you put that robe on.
What are some tools that you as an immigration judge, speaking in your capacity as the head of the NAIJ, have found beneficial in creating that kind of environment? How do you herd those cats in court and make sure you have this professional setting without the gotchas?
I like to think of the people as people who show up in my courtroom after I have no idea what their morning was like. There was one man who used to show up in my courtroom, always the first person on master calendars. He's an attorney, and he actually has 11 children. And I looked at him and thought, whatever you do in my courtroom, I'm going to be fine with, because I have no idea what you had to deal with, what kind of food fights took place in your household before you showed up. So looking at people as people and realizing this is just a small portion of their life and everybody is doing their very best. That is my goal. I also look at everybody as being on a kind of a stepladder in a way. I meet with a young attorney who might be early on in their career. They are very nervous. They don't go to court very often. They don't know what's going to happen. And so I look and I don't want to expect of that person what I might get from the practitioner who's been doing it for 20 years. I have a job to do to make them feel comfortable. They may need more of me early on in their career than they will later on.
And you're sitting in Manhattan, right? I mean, that when I think of the Manhattan, the New York City Immigration Court, I do not think calm. I think chaos. Between that and LA, I believe that's the most immigration judges in one court. And quite frankly, everything in New York is, to me, chaotic, being now a San Diegan. How do you deal with what New York City is giving you just by being New York City? It's not a world of calm. That's not its reputation.
Well, that is true. But I've been a judge in Los Angeles for 4.5 years, immigration judge, also a judge in Denver for 5 years. And I started my career as an asylum officer and a trial attorney in New York City. So for me, going into 26 Federal Plaza, where I preside, is like going home. I feel like I'm, in my 30s when I was just starting out. So I feel like New Yorkers can sometimes be, I'm a transplant here. So I feel like New Yorkers can be a little bit more gruff on the outside, but extremely warm on, once you get past a gruffer exterior. So for me, it's no problem. As I said, it's a lot of work, but you just try to realize that you're going to see these people every day in your career, and you want to make it a decent day for everyone.
I think you've become a New Yorker just without the gruff. I think that's the short answer, to paraphrase. Thank you for sharing that, Judge. I want to return to what's going on with the National Association of Immigration Judges. I know your time is limited, and so we have limited time today by definition, right? Because I think we could speak for 2 hours if you would let me, but you won't, and that is fine. So what is going on with the NAIJ? Kid, if you could talk a bit more about that. I don't even know if I know the right questions to ask.
Well, I'll kind of start from the fact that in the last administration, the Trump administration, he was really concerned about immigration. It's a hot topic. It's on everybody's minds, and it's in newspapers all the time, in the media. So when he came into office, I think that the approach was to try to find a way to address the backlog. Right now, we have 2.6 million cases in the backlog. When the Trump administration was in office, it was less than that, closer to about 1 million, but an unacceptable number. And so, quite rightly, the concern was how can they address that? Our worry was that the choice that they were making became speed over justice, in our view. There was we believe at National Association of Immigration Judges that the docketing decision making can become politicized because you have management judges deciding which cases are going to be the priorities. And that is a reflection of the law enforcement priorities of the administration. We think as an immigration court, we need to be pushing back and making sure that there are no pressures that are being placed on us that would intrude on our judicial independence. So because we were quite vocal and quite successful, I think, in being vocal, we got targeted for decertification. It's pretty much unheard of to decertify a union. We fought extremely diligently. And over time, we were, through the Federal Labor Relations Authority, in a very sparse decision, found that we were no longer eligible to be to be a union. They said that we were management supervisors, which is simply not the case. We are not that. And we have certainly fought this. We're in the process of reorganizing again. And as soon as the Federal Labor Relations Authority has what we know will be a complement of 3 judges sitting on the Federal Labor Relations Authority, we will be resubmitting our request to recertify.
That's a lot. And so that fight remains ongoing. I mean, I'm just curious if the administration takes the position that you are managers and supervisors instead of what entities are allowed. I'm not a labor lawyer. If you were just regular employees, you get to have a union. Is that essentially how union law works?
I am certainly a novice when it comes to understanding labor law as well, but I certainly know that you cannot be a manager and be part of a union. And when the Biden administration came into office, there was pending litigation regarding whether or not we were management officials. And the Biden administration, pulled back the motion to decertify us. But because it was so far along in the process, and the panel at the Federal Labor Relations Authority was still in power, we were unable to slow down the wheels of that justice, and we were ultimately decertified. So we think that there are very good arguments to advance to suggest that we remain union eligible. We're not managers, we're not supervisors, and we don't make policy.
It's interesting, though. I mean, and we're well beyond both of our expertise, but I wonder what benefits immigration judges would receive personally by being designated managers and supervisors. As employees, that sounds like maybe a better thing for a personal employee of the Department of Justice to be considered a manager or a supervisor than an employee. I wonder if that designation actually could benefit immigration judges too, but that's more of a labor question. To be, oh, wait a minute, these are actually managers and supervisors. They're not employees. They can't get a union, but now they're due X, Y, and Z. I'm sure smarter people than me have thought about that, and they decided to classify you as managers and supervisors anyway. But it's an interesting thought.
I think what gets to the crux of the issue, Kevin, is the fact that when you have a set of judges who are housed within the Department of Justice, a law enforcement agency, and if you classify them as non-union officials, then they don't have the power to speak up against the administration and say, you're imposing quotas and deadlines that are going to be due process denied. You are infringing on our judicial independence. They just have to accept it or retire from the job. So we as union officials can comment on concerns we have about the working conditions of immigration judges. And we've continued to advocate, but we do so as an association. And what we want to be able to is to regain our status so that we can continue to ensure that the system is as fair as it should be in every administration that's presiding.
The age of the union seems to be coming back. It had its high mark in the 60s and 70s, and it has taken some hits at the Supreme Court in recent years, but it seems like in a lot of contexts it's coming back. So I wish nothing but the best for the NAIJ, as maybe we ride this wave back into unions having a forefront and an important role in our society. But that's a great segue, Judge, into what is really the elephant in the room, what it seems like one of NAIJ's main goals is. And it's also the goal of the Federal Bar Association, and it's also the stated goal of AILA. And it's the reason why you were testifying before the Senate 2 days ago. And that is making immigration judges Article I judges. It's the shorthand. Not within the Department of Justice, but judges. Well, please explain what Article I is and why NAIJ wants it to happen.
An Article I immigration court would be a completely separate court and would ensure that due process would be afforded all of the parties that are appearing before us. Right now, we're part of the administration. So political priorities change, law enforcement priorities change through every new successive administration. If we can remove the immigration court function, just the adjudicatory function, to a separate branch created by Congress under Article I of the Constitution, we would be able to do our jobs in a more effective, efficient, and fairer way. And as you mentioned, we're not the only ones that advocate for the creation of this independent court. There have been congressional hearings, and even a bill was introduced in the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee last term that we're hoping will be introduced again this term that would create this separate independent immigration court.
So like Article I, it's a constitutional thing. That's Congress and Article I in the Constitution. So it's judges under Congress instead of the current situation where it's essentially judges under the president. And then you have Article III judges appointed by the president on the bench for life, the Supreme Court, the circuit courts, and the lower district courts. But other than that, pretty much all judges, when you think judges that aren't Article III judges, they're pretty much all Article I, right? Article II, like immigration judges, that's an anomaly.
There are many Article I courts. If you were to look that up online, you'll see that there are a lot of Article I judges,
right?
Such as the tax court, for example. And we know that would be probably the gold standard for ensuring the judicial independence for administrative judges. And so that's why we are advocating for that. And we at the hearing that I was in just a few days ago, even Senator Padilla was suggesting that is a solution that we should be looking at very, very closely to ensure independence for the adjudicatory functions of the immigration court.
By definition, that would completely take the Attorney General out of the picture, right? Attorneys General would no longer be able to issue precedential decisions, for example?
That's exactly right. We need the judges to no longer be subject to the whims of any new attorney general that is placed in an office. And we know that it will be beneficial in terms of addressing the backlog as well. Because right now, with every new administration, new attorney general who's placed in office, the case law changes through the process of self-certification to the attorney general. If we can get ourselves out of the back and forth swing of the case law, that might create greater confidence in the decisions of the court so that the parties that appear before us don't just wait out new, more favorable case law through the appellate process in each of the cases that is pending before the court.
Judge Tsankov, we are at the 30-minute mark. Is there anything else that I could get you to say that you'd like to say before we leave today?
I am just appreciative of the chance to speak with you and for you to be thinking about these questions and inviting me to be here today. I know that your listeners benefit from understanding, what it's like to hear it is as a judge when you're just joining the bench. And as much as we look to you to ensure that we, are mindful of what it's like to be a practitioner, you might want to look at the new judges and realize, okay, well, they may be just trying out their new persona on the bench as well. It's learning on both sides.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you for being with me today. Thank you for taking the time to speak on the Immigration Review podcast right after you spoke to Senator Padilla and the Senate subcommittee. So I like to think we're exactly on par with that. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. And thank you again.
Thank you.
So there you have it. I'm Kevin A. Gregg, a partner with the law firm Kurzban, Tetzeli, and Pratt, and this has been another episode of Immigration Review. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share it with a friend and rate and review us. Each review helps new listeners find the show. And of course, subscribe to Immigration Review wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what we do and want to become a patron of the show, please check out our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/Immigration Review or click on the link in the show notes. And if you're interested in an official Immigration Review CLE certificate, email me at kgreg@kktplaw.com with your full name and the episode numbers for the 10 shows you've listened to. Also, feel free to email me with questions, comments, or anything at all, and follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Immigration Review, or send us a tweet at ImReview. That's IMM Review. I'll be back next Monday for a brand new discussion. Until then, I'm Kevin A. Gregg, bringing you the Immigration Review.